Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today to talk about the North Texas Coerced Legal Representation Pilot Program. Today, we're going to be covering the first 3 steps of the pilot program, including how to screen for coerced debt. My name is Brianna Gordley, and I'm a senior policy analyst at Texas Appleseed, working to advocate for consumer protections, including financial abuse and coerced debt. Before joining Texas Appleseed, I worked directly with survivors of domestic violence as a shelter advocate and as a rapid rehousing case manager. So the pilot program referral process, what steps need to be taken to get survivors connected to the pilot program? So there are 6 steps total, but today we are just going to be focusing on steps 1 through 3. Step 1, determine eligibility for the pilot program. Step 2, review survivors' legal rights. And step 3, screen for coerced debt. So step 1, determine eligibility for the pilot program. To be eligible for the Coerced pilot program, the survivor must be a survivor of domestic violence, human trafficking, stalking, or sexual assault. And I want to make sure this is very clear. If the survivor is receiving services at your domestic violence program, then they automatically qualify for services at the Texas Advocacy Project, or TAP, pending a conflict check. And so when you're looking at referring clients, if they're interested in the program and they're your client and they're at the DV program, then they're eligible for the pilot program, and you'll then proceed to step 2. So step 2 is reviewing the survivor's legal rights. And this is where we get into actually explaining what the pilot program is to its survivor to see if they do want to partake in the pilot program. So when it comes to coerced debt, people have certain legal rights. So we typed up a description here for you to relay to the survivor, and now I'm going to read through this. There is a new free service available to address credit problems related to coerced debts caused by an abuser. These debts are called coerced debts. Under Texas law, you may have legal rights to get identity theft protections for coerced debts and qualify for a legal protection called a Chapter 521 order. This order can be used to help rebuild credit by removing coerced debts from your credit report, or as a defense if you get sued to collect a debt, a coerced debt. At the end of this process, we can talk about any safety and privacy concerns you may have to determine the best path towards this new free program that keeps you safe. Are you interested in answering a few questions to see if this program is a good fit for you? And so this is what you would share with a survivor when you're introducing them to the Coerced pilot program, to one, relay what the actual program is, what protection they would be seeking, and then what the next steps are. And so after sharing this information with the survivor, if they express interest in the pilot program, then you're going to proceed to step 3. Now, step 3 is screening for coerced debt. If a survivor does not have coerced debts, then they would not be eligible for the coerced debt pilot program. So you want to make sure that you're screening properly for coerced debt to see if a client makes sense to be referred into the program. And so for your initial client interview, it's really important to understand that survivors are rarely going to self-identify as having experienced coerced debt. Survivors may not know what the term coerced debt is. It's actually very likely that they don't. And they also may not be aware if they've had any coerced debts or even how to describe them. And so screening with intentionality is extremely important when we talk about referrals into this program. It also may seem to the survivor as though they consented to the debt. And this is when we're talking about coerced debt and the coercion piece. So if a survivor does know about a debt, but they were forced to take it out through threat, fraud, or coercion, then it's not effective consent, but a survivor may not understand that difference. And so it's really important to ask probing questions to determine whether the survivor was forced to take out the debt because of fear or harm to themselves or to others, or if it was a pattern of control and abuse. And so a few tips when you're interviewing survivors and starting the screening process, it's probably important to preface any economic or financial questions with phrases like, I know this is uncomfortable, or I'm here to support you and will not judge you. It's statements like these that can help calm a survivor, especially when you're going to start talking about finances. Finances are a sticky topic, even for people who have not experienced violence. People are usually pretty tight-lipped about their finances and their financial state. And so when you factor that in, and you also factor in a person who is experiencing violence and abuse, talking about your finances can feel very pervasive and very uncomfortable. And you want to make sure that you relay to the survivor that you recognize these dynamics and that you want to make this a safe and comfortable place so that you can have an open, encouraging, and comfortable conversation with the survivor about coerced debts. You also want to stay away from using the word force. I know that force is in the definition of coerced debt, and when we're talking about coerced debt, we use words like threat, force, and fraud, but survivors can potentially have a very heavy reaction to the word force and will, for example, instantly say that they were not forced. No one wants to believe that they've done something that they didn't fully consent to. And so that's why you may get those very strong reactions. And so instead, you want to try phrases like, well, did you feel that you couldn't say no? Or did you feel pressured? And so now you want to start looking for red flag statements. And you don't have to start looking for these statements right when you're screening for coerced debt. When you're doing your initial intake with clients or when you're having just general client conversations during case management, there are certain statements that you want to look out for that a survivor may be saying. So going through a few of these, for example, well, my ex handled all of the mail, or I didn't have access to the mail during my relationship. Well, I don't want my ex to know where I live now. Well, the car loan is in my name, but I don't have a license or I don't have the car. I can't access my bank statement or tax returns or financial documents. My spouse handles all of that. I opened that account because my spouse asked or told me to. I guess my ex added himself or herself on that account. I didn't know. So when you hear statements like this, where it sounds like the survivor has lost some type of autonomy when it comes to important financial documents or bank accounts or credit, that should send a signal in your head that, uh-oh, this may be a red flag statement and I need to dive in deeper. And so we'll start by breaking down these statements. So if you hear a survivor say, my ex handled all of the mail, or I didn't have access to the mail during my relationship, here are a few follow-up questions that you should ask. First, well, was that your decision or your partner's decision? And were you comfortable with that arrangement? As advocates, you know that you can't make assumptions about a survivor's relationship. You know that they've come to you because they are a victim of abuse, but there are some scenarios or some experiences that may seem abusive and potentially may not be, which is why you want to ask, was that your decision or your partner's? So if we hear a red flag statement such as my ex handled all of the mail, well, maybe the survivor wanted that to be the case, and that's actually not a bad thing. Were you comfortable with this arrangement? Well, maybe the survivor was comfortable with that arrangement. So you want to walk the line of both recognizing red flag statements, but also not making assumptions before you've asked those more probing questions. Moving on to, I don't want my ex to know where I live now. Asking questions such as, well, do you keep your address confidential? Or do you think your ex might hurt you if they found out where you lived? Now, asking this question will simply depend on what provision of services you're offering a survivor. So if you're a shelter advocate, you know that a survivor has come to you because their address is no longer safe. So this may not be something that you'll necessarily be asking. But if you are giving legal services or you are doing counseling services and your client brings up they don't want their ex to know where they live, okay, that may indicate more is going on and you want to ask those probing questions. And then next, the car loan is in my name, but I don't have a license and I don't have A or the car. So this is where we actually get into the coerced debt piece, more of that standard case that we hear about. And so some follow-up questions that you may want to ask are, well, why did it end up in your name? Or did you want to sign the loan? Who made the payments? And who has the car? And these questions are very intentional because, again, you don't want to make assumptions that the survivor was coerced into taking out this debt, but you do want to start with that in mind so that you know what types of questions to ask. So asking the survivor, well, how did it end up in your name? Was this because the survivor gave their effective consent? Or were they forced to? And you won't know that until you ask the question. Same with, did you want to sign a loan? Maybe the survivor did, but there's a good chance that they didn't. And so you want to ask these questions to parse out that information. More red flag statements from the following slide. I can't access my bank statement, tax returns, financial documents. My spouse handles all of that. And I want to point out with this one, when you hear words like can't, that may lead you to think that there is an accessibility issue, and that's what makes that a red flag statement. It's different than, well, I don't access my bank statements, but they're saying they can't, which means that there may be an inability to, and that can be concerning. So if you follow up questions, you can ask then, well, could you access them if you wanted to, if you were given the choice? What would happen if you asked for those documents? Is your spouse secretive about that information? So you're just fact gathering. You're trying to learn more about the circumstances before you jump to conclusions. Another one, I opened that account because my spouse asked me to. Again, you really want to parse out autonomy here. Well, did you feel like you had a choice? Was it your decision to? Did they ask you to and you genuinely effectively agreed to or not? And what do you think would have happened if you hadn't opened the account? And then finally, I guess my spouse added themselves onto that account. I didn't know. Now, this is more of a red flag, definitely more concerning, because in this statement, the survivor clearly says they didn't know, which does lead to the fraudulent piece, but you still want to ask this follow-up questions. Well, do you know of any other financial actions by your spouse that might impact you? Or when and how did you find out that they were using this account? And so for this pilot program, in conjunction with the domestic violence programs, we created a screening tool, which you'll be able to find on the Texas Appleseed resource website. But we wanted to go ahead and put the questions up here so that you can see them. So there's 7 questions that you'll ask a survivor as you're going through the screening process in order to determine if they're eligible for the pilot program. A survivor just needs to answer yes to the first 6 in order to be able to be referred. And if they do ask or answer yes to a question, please ask them if they feel comfortable sharing more information about their experience. And I want to make sure this is clear. Survivors at this point of the pilot program are not required to provide you with additional information if they don't feel comfortable. So if you're going through this screening tool and they just want to answer yes or they just want to answer no, that's their right to, because later through the pilot process and the referral process, there will be more opportunities to share more detailed information about these questions. And so starting off with number 1, do you have financial problems related to debt because of something your abuser did? Again, if a survivor answers yes to this, you already can move forward with the referral process, but it's still important to go through the remaining of the questions. And if they say yes, ask them if they're comfortable to share more information. 2, has your abuser ever kept financial information from you, such as information about bills or loans? 3, has your abuser ever pressured, threatened, or forced you to borrow money or buy something on credit, like taking out a car loan or credit card when you didn't want to? 4, have you ever found out about debt or bills that your abuser put in your name without you knowing? 5, have you been or are you getting contacted about a debt that you don't recognize or that was taken out by your abuser? 6, have you been denied credit, housing, or a job because of financial problems caused by your abuser? And so if a survivor answers yes to at least one of those 6 questions, then you would move on to asking question 7. Are you interested in getting free legal help to address those debt-related financial problems? And we include this question because survivors may be eligible for the pilot program, but after going through the screening process, after you've reviewed their legal rights, they still just may not want to partake in the pilot program, and that is their choice. They have the right to decline. And so at different points throughout this process, we want to be touching base with the survivor to just make sure that they still want to engage in the process and that they know it's their choice if they do or don't. And so again, this screening tool is located on the resource website by Texas Appleseed, and there's a printable version and there's also a PDF version so that you can fill this out online. And then finally, as you're going through this process, as you're asking those screening questions, here are just a few examples of some of those open-ended questions that you can continue to ask. So, for example, as far as you know, has anyone ever done something to impact your credit or debit? If so, or debt? If so, can you tell me a little bit more about what happened? Tell me about your household's financial situation. Who handles money matters? How often do you talk about finances? What are those conversations like? When you signed for that loan or credit card, what kind of information was shared with you about the process of paying it back? What were you feeling when you signed up for it? And finally, have you ever suspected or been worried that someone opened or used an account in your name without your permission? If so, can you tell me a little bit more about that? What gave you the idea that this might be occurring? So these are just a few examples of more open-ended questions so that you can really help get to the bottom of a survivor's financial state when it comes to coerced debts. So thank you for joining and learning more about the screening process, as well as steps 1 through 3 for the North Texas Coerced Debt Pilot Program.